My name is Hazel Mitchell. I'm 33 years old, and I work as a strategic marketing consultant in Portland. 2 months ago, I got a text from my mother that ended something I had spent years trying to hold together. We've changed the locks. The new gate code is private now. We no longer feel safe with you around. I sat frozen, reading the words over and over. They weren't just locking me out of the house. They were locking me out of the role they had always expected me to fill. For 2 years, I had been quietly paying their $5,600 monthly mortgage, sacrificing vacations, a home of my own, and half my income, to protect the one place I thought still tied us together. But they gave that house to my sister Lila, the one who never paid a cent. As the silence settled, I sent one reply: understood. You've made your choice. But so have I. Before I take you through what came next, I'd love to know, have you ever been pushed out by the very people you tried to protect? Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, hit that like button and subscribe, because this story is for you. Let me show you how walking away from the house I paid for became the first step toward finally coming home to myself. I grew up in a pale yellow house on the corner of Elm and Willow, in a quiet town called Silverfield, where people still waved to each other from their driveways and the mail carrier knew everyone by name. From the outside, our 4-bedroom house looked like any other in the neighborhood: trimmed hedges, a swing on the front porch, wind chimes that sang in the summer breeze. But inside, everything revolved around my younger sister, Lila. Lila was the center of every room, even when she wasn't in it. She had a way of pulling attention like gravity, and our parents, Thomas and Margaret Mitchell, floated right toward her. They never said it outright. No one needed to. The hierarchy was as natural as the seasons. Lila, the radiant one, the delicate one, the girl who needed just a little more support, a little more patience, a little more praise, and me, Hazel, the quiet one, the capable one, the daughter who didn't cause trouble and therefore didn't require attention. Birthdays were the easiest way to measure the difference. Lila's always included themed parties with decorations, neighborhood kids, and a multi-tiered cake from her favorite bakery. One year, they even rented a miniature petting zoo. Mine were quieter: dinner at home, a store-bought cake with our names spelled out in cursive frosting, and gifts that leaned more toward necessity than delight. New notebooks for school, a calculator, a sensible sweater. When I brought home straight A's, my father would nod from behind his newspaper and murmur, "Good work, sweetheart." When Lila passed algebra after a semester of tears and late-night tutoring, they took her out for dinner and gave her a charm bracelet. "She just needs more encouragement," my mother would say with a sigh, like she was explaining some fundamental truth I was too cold to grasp. "You're naturally gifted, Hazel. You don't need the same level of support." So I learned not to need it. I stopped bringing home my report cards. I stopped mentioning when I won school competitions or when my teacher pulled me aside to say she'd never seen someone write with such insight. I stopped waiting for applause that would never come. Instead, I worked harder, stayed later at school, learned to cook dinner when Mom was running late from taking Lila to dance or horseback riding or whatever new thing she'd begged to try. Some nights, I'd hear my parents laughing with Lila in the kitchen, their voices warm and close. I'd sit at the top of the stairs, book in hand, pretending I wasn't listening, pretending it didn't matter, that I didn't ache for the same attention, the same easy affection. I told myself I was above it, that needing anything from them would only make me feel smaller. But the truth was simpler. I wasn't above it. I was around it, just enough to feel the edges of it, never enough to be included. By high school, I knew my role. I was the reliable one, the girl who didn't make waves, the daughter who wouldn't disappoint, and deep down, maybe I even believed them, that if I worked hard enough, was quiet enough, responsible enough, maybe one day they'd look at me the way they looked at Lila, not with pity, not with obligation, but with pride, and maybe that would be enough. My grandparents passed away within months of each other. First my grandmother in February, then my grandfather in June. Their loss was quiet but heavy, like snow settling on a roof. They had lived in the same house my parents now owned, the one where I grew up, The one where I spent summers chasing fireflies in the backyard and winters curled up on the hearth reading library books, while my grandmother knit scarves no one asked for. When the will was read, the house wasn't left to my parents directly. It was left to the family, a subtle clause, but intentional. My grandparents had seen the imbalance. They had seen me. By then, I was already living in Portland. I had started building a life of my own, working in digital marketing, saving slowly for a down payment on a condo in a quiet corner of the city. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I had spreadsheets tracking everything: rent, groceries, future projections. I had a coffee shop where they knew my order and a view of the river from my tiny apartment window. I wasn't rich, but I was stable and proud. 2 years later, my parents called a Sunday dinner. Nothing dramatic, just a gathering: roast chicken, green beans, wine that I brought from a vineyard outside Portland because my mother had once said she liked it. That night, I noticed something different in their tone. Lighter at first, then waited. The food was served, plates passed, and then my father cleared his throat. They were facing foreclosure. They didn't say it all at once. It came in pieces, a few missed payments, then more. My father's consulting work had slowed. My mother's health insurance premiums had gone up, and helping Lila and Chase, again and again, had drained them. It wasn't said with shame, more like inevitability, like gravity had finally pulled them down, and I was the net they had always assumed would be there. I sat in silence, letting the facts settle. A $5,600 monthly mortgage, 2 years behind. The risk of losing the house, my grandparents' house, was real. I should have felt anger, resentment. But what I felt, above everything else, was sadness, not just for them, but for the house, for what it once held. "I can take over the mortgage," I said, my voice quiet but certain. "At least until things get stable again." They looked relieved. Not grateful, relieved, as if this had been the plan all along. Margaret and Thomas Mitchell didn't thank me that night. There was no toast, no embrace. My mother did pat my hand once and say, "We knew you'd understand." That was it. That was my reward. That evening, I drove back to Portland in silence, the highway dark and endless ahead of me. I did the math in my head. What I could cut, what I could pause. I canceled my weekend yoga class, put off the condo, delayed my vacation, picked up side contracts, branding work, digital audits, anything to help make the numbers work. It was tight. Tighter than I let on, but I told myself it was worth it. Because it wasn't just a house. It was the only place that had ever held anything close to love. It was the smell of cinnamon rolls in December, even if no one said "I'm proud of you." It was the back porch swing where I used to watch thunderstorms roll across the hills. It was the room where my grandmother once tucked me in and whispered, "You see more than you say. And that's your power." So I paid the mortgage, month after month, quietly, faithfully, without contracts, without acknowledgement, every Sunday. I drove to Silverfield for dinner. I sat at the same table, in the same chair, while Lila told stories about her latest job loss or how Chase was figuring things out. My father nodded. My mother refilled her wineglass. I cleared the dishes. They never once asked how work was going for me. Not really. If I mentioned a promotion or a client win, it was met with a vague, "That's nice, honey." But when Lila decided to open an Etsy shop for handmade jewelry and quit her retail job, that was celebrated with applause and homemade lemon cake. My best friend, Amelia, couldn't believe it. "You're paying their mortgage," she said, her eyes wide. "And they don't even ask how you're doing." Even Ryan, my boyfriend, said it gently one night over takeout. I just wish they saw what I see. But I kept going. Because that house mattered. Because some part of me still believed that if I did enough, gave enough, stayed long enough, maybe the story would shift. Maybe I'd finally be enough to notice. Maybe they'd finally say thank you. But they never did. And still, I stayed. It was a Sunday in early spring when everything quietly shifted. The kind of evening where the wind still carries a winter chill, but the sun stays out just long enough to pretend otherwise. I arrived at the house in Silverfield a little after 6, like I always did. With a bottle of Pinot Noir and a lemon tart from the bakery, My mother pretended to like but never finished. The table was already set. Lila was there, of course, with Chase, both of them looking unusually animated. I took my usual seat, the one closest to the kitchen, the one where I could stand up quickly if I needed to. Dinner unfolded like most others. Lila talked about a new interest in pottery this time, how she was finally finding her center. Chase chimed in about maybe starting a podcast, something about mindset and masculinity. My updates about work, a campaign that had gone viral for a major client, barely registered. My father said impressive without looking up from his plate. My mother asked if I had considered dating someone more stable than Ryan, then laughed like it was a joke. I smiled tightly, as I'd trained myself to do. But it wasn't until we moved to the living room for coffee that the real conversation began. My father cleared his throat, his usual signal. My mother straightened in her chair. Lila's eyes lit up with anticipation. I felt something cold settle in my chest. "We have some news," my father said. Glancing at Lila in that way, he used to look at her before announcing birthday surprises. "Lila and Chase are going to be moving in," my mother added, her voice light, like it was a favor to them. "Their lease is ending, and this house is just too big for your father and me anyway." I blinked, trying to keep my tone even. "I see. And the mortgage? I assume they'll be contributing. Since I'm still covering the full payments." A silence dropped into the room like a stone in water. Chase shifted uncomfortably. My father cleared his throat again, but nothing came. My mother stared into her coffee. "Well," she finally said, "we thought, since you're doing so well in the city, and Lila and Chase could really use a place to land." My heart began to thud, not from surprise, but from the slow realization that I already knew where this was headed. "What your father means," she continued. Her tone sweetened now with practiced maternal concern, "is that Lila deserves this house. She's always been so attached to it. And with you living in Portland, it just makes more sense. Deserves the house." Those words rang louder than anything else. I had paid over $130,000 into that mortgage. I had given up my own home, my own space, to preserve this one. And now, somehow, I was being told it had always belonged to someone else. "I see," I said softly, not trusting myself with anything more. Lila leaned back smugly. "Don't be dramatic, Hazel. It's not like you don't have the money. And Mom and Dad always said I'd probably inherit it anyway." I looked directly at my parents. "Is that true?" I asked, knowing full well that their silence would be the only answer I needed. Neither of them met my eyes. "I think I should go," I said, rising slowly. "You always do this," Lila snapped. "Whenever things don't go your way, you run. You should be happy for us instead of keeping score." I stopped at the door. My voice was calm, but my hands trembled. "Supporting the family is exactly what I've been doing," I said. "Financially, at least. But I'm starting to wonder if that's been a mistake." No one replied. I stepped out into the night, the air sharp and unforgiving. I didn't cry. Not yet. That would come later, in the quiet of my Portland apartment, with Ryan's arms wrapped around me as I tried to explain what it feels like to be erased in the house you've been holding together with your own two hands. They didn't take my name off the deed. I had never been on it. But that night, they made something else clear. I might have paid for the house, but I had never been invited to stay. It happened on a Tuesday morning. I was standing in front of the bathroom mirror, half dressed for work, mascara wand in hand, when my phone buzzed with a notification. The sender was my mother. The message, brief and clinical, began with 4 words I'll never forget. "We've changed the locks." The rest of the text explained that the front door and gate code had both been updated. "We no longer feel safe," she wrote. "Lila said she saw you driving by late last night. It made her feel threatened. Please respect our decision." I stood there for a long moment, phone in hand, staring at those words like they were written in another language. Threatened. Driving by. I hadn't been anywhere near Silverfield in over a week. I'd been working late, trying to meet a deadline. I hadn't even left Portland. But none of that mattered. The accusation wasn't about truth. It was about power. They didn't want me near the house, and now they had made that permanent. I sat down on the edge of my bed, still in my blouse, mascara half done, and read the message again, then again. I scrolled back, rereading the months of quiet compliance, the polite check-ins, the unreciprocated support. There was no build-up to this moment, no warning, just a clean, calculated removal. That night, I called Amelia. I didn't even say hello. They changed the locks, I said as soon as she picked up. They locked me out of the house I've been paying for because Lila made up a story about me lurking around in the dark. There was a pause, then her voice, sharper than usual. That's it. This is the last straw. Hazel, they're not just taking advantage of you anymore. They're punishing you for not being invisible. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. She was right. Deep down, I already knew. I called Ryan next, my voice shaky. He listened silently as I explained, then said quietly, "You're done. Hazel, you've done more than anyone should ever be expected to do, and they've made their choice." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. For the first time, the weight didn't just feel heavy. It felt sharp, cutting. I wasn't just being ignored anymore. I was being erased. That evening, I sat with my laptop open and stared at the recurring mortgage payment, the one that had quietly drained my account every month without a thank you, without a trace of gratitude. I didn't cancel it. Yet. I just hovered over the button, hands trembling, chest tight. How had we gotten here? I thought about the front steps my grandfather had built by hand. The creak of the third stair leading up to the second floor. The smell of rose soap in the downstairs bathroom. I thought about every time I'd shown up, carrying dinner, wine, rent money. Every time I'd sat through Lila's crises. Every time I'd swallowed my hurt in the name of family. And now I was locked out, without a word, without a conversation, without a door left open. I didn't cry, not then. There's a kind of grief that's too deep for tears. Grief that's shaped like betrayal. Grief that looks like a text message from your own mother, telling you that your presence is no longer welcome in the house you've kept alive. They didn't just change the locks, they changed the story. And in their version, I was no longer part of it. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the soft hum of the city outside my window reminding me how far I'd come, and how little it had mattered to the people I once called home. By morning, the ache in my chest had hardened into something quieter. Not anger, not sadness, just clarity. I made a pot of coffee, sat down at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and pulled up my online banking account. The mortgage payment was scheduled to pull automatically, as it had for the last 23 months. I stared at the amount. $5,600. Even now it didn't feel real. That was someone's rent for 3 months. That was the down payment I'd postponed. That was everything I'd been too afraid to keep for myself. I hovered over the cancel button, not with rage, not even with defiance, just with the understanding that this, finally, was mine to decide. Click. A confirmation prompt appeared. I clicked yes. Then I opened my email and drafted a message to the mortgage lender. I explained that I was not a co-owner of the property, that my payments had been voluntary, and that I would no longer be making them. I kept it formal, unemotional, professional. I attached a copy of my driver's license and requested written confirmation of the cancellation. When I hit send, I sat back and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding since I was 15. The first few days were quiet, too quiet. I knew they hadn't noticed yet. The mortgage wasn't due until the first of the month, and it was still the 26th. I imagined them in Silverfield, Margaret and Thomas drinking coffee in the kitchen, Lila scrolling through her phone, Chase tinkering with some idea he'd never follow through on, all of them completely unaware that the floor beneath them was no longer being held up by me. I spent those days preparing myself. I found a therapist, Dr. Maya Holloway, a woman with calm eyes and a voice like still water. In our first session, I told her everything, starting from the birthdays with store-bought cakes all the way to the message about changed locks. She listened. She didn't interrupt. And when I finally stopped talking, she said one sentence that I've never forgotten. "Hazel, what you've been doing all these years isn't love, it's endurance, and enduring isn't the same as being seen." I sat there, stunned, because someone finally named it. We talked about boundaries, not as punishments, but as truths. That saying no is not the same as being cruel. That choosing peace over pleasing is an act of healing, not betrayal. That you don't have to earn a place in your own story by bleeding quietly in the margins. I left that session lighter, still grieving. Yes, still hurting. But somehow, grounded. For the first time. I wasn't just reacting, I was choosing. Then, on the 30th, my phone lit up like a storm. First a missed call from Lila, then a voicemail from Chase, tight, passive-aggressive, full of questions he already knew the answers to. Then came my father's text, Hazel. This is serious. You need to call us immediately. The bank reached out about a missed payment. And finally, from my mother. The message that almost made me laugh, sweetheart. I think there's been a misunderstanding. We only changed the locks for security. There were break-ins in the neighborhood. Of course you're still welcome here. Of course. I didn't respond. I let the silence answer for me. Because sometimes, when people finally notice your absence, it's the only time they start asking why you were there at all. 3 days after the missed payment, the desperation began to curdle into something meaner. It started with the messages. Relentless, manipulative, rehearsed in the way only practiced guilt can be. My father sent one that read, "We've always done our best for you. Hazel, this is not how family treats each other. Call your mother." My mother's tone was softer, but no less strategic. "I know you're hurting, sweetie, but hurting others won't heal anything. Think of the house. Think of Lila. They never mentioned what they'd done, never acknowledged the locks, never addressed the fact that they'd turned me into a stranger in the house I was paying for. Every message rewrote history. Like if they just said it enough, their version would become the only one left standing. But what came next shattered any illusion that we could return to anything resembling a relationship. I was in the middle of a meeting, one I had led, one that mattered, when my boss, Greg, pulled me aside. His voice was careful, but there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before: concern. "Hey, Hazel, just a heads up," he said quietly. "Your sister called earlier, said she was worried about you, mentioned something about you having a breakdown." The air left my lungs. What I asked, my voice low, measured only by habit. Greg held up his hands gently. "She said she was calling out of love," he added. "Wanted to make sure someone here knew." It felt strange. "I figured I'd check in with you directly." I nodded. Once. Too stunned to react. Too practiced to fall apart in front of anyone. Back at my desk, I stared at the screen for 20 minutes before doing anything else. Lila had called my workplace. Not to apologize, not to understand, but to undermine, but to place a subtle crack in the foundation I'd built without their help. And that's when it finally settled in. Not like a sudden blow, but like something old rising up from below the surface. They didn't see me. Not as a person. Not as a daughter. Not as anything separate from what I could provide, cover, fix, or absorb. To them, I was a utility, a bank account with a face, a silence that made their lives easier. They weren't afraid of losing me. They were afraid of losing access to me. That distinction changed everything. Ryan came over that night with groceries and quiet comfort. He didn't ask questions, just cooked pasta while I sat at the kitchen table and tried to breathe through the tightness in my chest. Later, when I finally spoke, it came out as a whisper. They think they can still twist it. They think if they cry loud enough. "I'll come back." He looked up from the stove. "You won't," he said, "because you finally know what it costs." And he was right. For years, I thought I was preserving something sacred. But it wasn't sacred. It was survival dressed as tradition. It was a hierarchy carved so deep into the family structure that no one even noticed the blood at the bottom. That night, I turned off my phone for the first time in years. And for the first time, I didn't wonder what I was missing. I already knew. Nothing worth returning to. It was Ryan who first suggested I speak to a lawyer. We were walking along the waterfront in Portland, the air crisp with early fall. When he said it, gently, without pressure, just a suggestion laid down like a stone path toward clarity. "You've done everything right," he said, his hand brushing mine. "But you don't have to keep guessing what's fair. Maybe it's time someone told you." Legally, where you stand. The idea settled quietly in my chest. I had spent so long thinking in terms of obligation, of what was expected, what would avoid conflict, that I hadn't once asked what was allowed. What was mine? What was legal? 2 days later, I sat across from Sophia Ramirez, a family law attorney recommended by Dr. Holloway. Her office was lined with framed degrees and calm, neutral colors, the kind of place where difficult truths could land without echo. She asked me to walk her through everything. So I did. I told her about the house in Silverfield, the mortgage I'd taken over, the $5,600 I'd paid every month for nearly 2 years, the decision to cancel the payments, the locks, the lies, the silence that followed. I showed her the texts. The one from my father that said, "We appreciate you helping with the mortgage until we get back on our feet." The one from my mother that said, "Just until things stabilize. We'll make it right when we can." Sophia listened with the steady focus of someone who'd heard hundreds of variations of the same wound, but still treated each one like it mattered. When I finished, she leaned back, laced her fingers together, and spoke with the kind of clarity I didn't know I needed. "You have no legal obligation to continue those payments. Hazel, the mortgage is in your parents' names, not yours. What you've done over the last 2 years has been an act of goodwill, but there's nothing binding you to that responsibility." I exhaled, slowly, deeply, as if my body had been waiting for someone to tell it that it could finally stop bracing. "And they can't sue me?" I asked. "For stopping. They can try," she said, almost kindly. "But they'd lose, especially with these messages. They show this was always intended to be temporary and voluntary. If anything, you've been extraordinarily generous. Extraordinarily generous." No one had ever used those words for me before. We spent the rest of the hour going over documentation. I printed bank statements, collected email chains, flagged the voicemail where my father called my contributions a gift to the family. Sophia built a folder that felt like armor, not for war, but for boundary. Later that week, I met with a financial advisor. His name was Lucas, and he had a calm, math-forward way of speaking that reminded me of every spreadsheet I'd ever made late at night with trembling hands. He reviewed my current savings, projected my new budget without the mortgage payments, and looked up at me with something almost like pride. "At this pace," he said, "you could have a down payment for your own place within 6 months. My own place." The words hit me harder than I expected, not because I hadn't thought about it, but because for the first time, it felt real. Mine, without anyone else's name on the deed, without permission or apology. That night, I sat at my kitchen counter with a glass of wine and stared out at the city lights. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still, and in that stillness, something inside me quietly changed. I was no longer asking if I had the right to say no. Now, I was starting to ask what I might say yes to. The notice arrived at the Silverfield house exactly 30 days after I canceled the last payment. According to Aunt Eleanor, who had become my quiet source of truth behind the curtain. My mother read the letter aloud at the kitchen table, her hands shaking, her voice barely above a whisper. My father, upon hearing the word foreclosure, stood up so quickly his chair tipped over. They hadn't believed it would come to this. They'd thought I would fold, that the guilt would eventually pull me back in, like it always had. But this time, I didn't. The official warning gave them 60 days. 60 days to cover the arrears or face a public listing of the property. They tried to apply for refinancing, twice. Both applications were denied. My father's age worked against him. My mother's credit was too fragile from years of secret loans. Even Chase tried stepping in, offering to co-sign. But his record was worse than either of theirs. No bank wanted the liability. Lila and Chase had their own unraveling. Their shared savings were gone, spent on short-lived ventures and Instagram-ready weekends they couldn't afford. Chase had been out of work for months, and Lila's side hustles never lasted long enough to matter. Under pressure, their carefully curated image of success collapsed. Arguments turned into silences, silences into separate bank accounts. Then Chase moved out, back in with his parents in Colorado. Lila stayed behind, defiant but hollowed. They didn't call it a separation. But everyone knew. And through it all, they came back to me. Not with apologies, not with admission, just need. A voicemail from my mother, soft and tremulous. Hazel. I think this has all gone too far. Your father and I, we're scared. If you could just speak to the bank. Maybe delay things. A text from my father. You're going to let this house go after everything we've built. This is still your family. Even Lila reached out once. An email this time, short, blunt, no greeting, no warmth. Just this house is about more than money. Don't make us lose it because you're bitter. Bitter. That was the word they always reached for when I stopped being useful. Not strong, not clear, not done, just bitter. But I didn't respond. Not once. I had nothing left to explain. And more importantly, nothing left to offer. I let the phone ring. Let the messages pile up. Let the silence hold its shape. Because they needed to sit with it. The weight of their choices. The impact of every decision made under the assumption that I would always be there to clean up the mess. And this time, I wasn't. It wasn't revenge. It was restraint. It was choosing not to rescue the people who had once locked me out without looking back. Letting them feel the edges of reality for once, without the cushion of my sacrifice. Aunt Eleanor kept me updated, gently. She never pushed, just offered glimpses. My mother started selling jewelry. My father considered returning to work part-time, something he hadn't done in over a decade. Lila stopped posting photos. The house grew quieter, heavier, a structure still standing, but hollowing, inch by inch. And I remained still, not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood caring didn't mean carrying everything alone. It was Aunt Eleanor who made the call. They've asked for a family meeting, she said gently over the phone. At my house. Sunday afternoon. Everyone will be there, including Harold Crane, the lawyer they've brought in. They say it's to clear the air. But Hazel, I think it's their last attempt to hold on to what they've already lost. I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to say no. To stay in the quiet, clean safety I'd built away from them. But another part, the part that had stayed silent too long, understood this wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about truth and closure. So I said yes. With one condition, I wouldn't go alone. Ryan sat beside me in the car as we pulled up to Aunt Eleanor's home, a modest blue bungalow with a garden she tended herself. In the back seat, a leather folder held every bank statement, every email, every message that had ever hinted at obligation or erased intention. I wasn't going to fight, but I also wasn't going to flinch. Inside, the living room had been rearranged, chairs in a circle, neutral colors, an uneasy silence hanging just beneath the air freshener. My mother was already crying. My father looked older than I remembered, his posture tense, his eyes hollow. Lila sat with her arms crossed, a blank expression barely hiding the resentment beneath. Chase was there too, half turned toward the window, as if already calculating his exit. And in the corner, Harold Crane, buttoned up, uncomfortable, and clearly hoping this would be brief. I took a seat across from them. Ryan remained beside me, steady and wordless. Aunt Eleanor stood in the doorway, her presence the only thing grounding the room. My father cleared his throat. Hazel, thank you for coming. We're here because the bank has moved forward with foreclosure. We have 60 days before the house is listed publicly. We need to discuss options. I didn't move, didn't blink, just waited. My mother leaned forward, her voice trembling. This is our family home. Hazel, your grandparents built it with love. How can you let it go so easily? I didn't let it go, I said quietly. You locked me out of it. Harold Crane cleared his throat, glancing at his notes. Miss Mitchell, your parents have informed me that your past payments were generous, but not contractually binding. They hoped you might reconsider, perhaps resume the payments temporarily, while a solution is arranged. I opened the folder and removed the printed messages, one by one. I laid them gently on the table. Would you like to read the message where they told me I was no longer trusted, or the one where they changed the locks and said I made Lila feel unsafe, or maybe the one where my contributions were called a gift, something I apparently wasn't allowed to take back? Harold looked down. clearly uncomfortable. My father shifted in his seat. My mother cried harder. Lila snapped. "This is so typical," she said through clenched teeth. "You always play the victim. You think you're better than the rest of us just because you make more money. So what if Mom and Dad wanted me to have the house? You don't even live there." I looked at her, not with anger, but with something colder. Clarity. "I don't live there because I was paying both the mortgage and my own rent. Because I gave up buying a home so you could play house without paying for it." Chase muttered something about not being productive, but I didn't even look at him. "I'm not resuming the payments," I said, steady as stone. "Not for a house I've been barred from. Not for people who have treated me like a wallet with a pulse." My father's voice broke then, loud and raw. "So you're just going to let it go? Let the house go to strangers? Your mother and I. Where are we supposed to go?" "You could get jobs," I said, without flinching. "Like I did. Pay your mortgage like adults do," my mother wailed. My father stared at me as if I were someone he'd never met. And I think, for the first time, I was. "What do you want?" Hazel, my mother asked through tears. "Do you want the house?" "Is that it?" "No," I said. "I don't want the house." I stood, slowly. The room felt too still. "I want respect. I want to stop being the daughter who is only remembered when someone needs a checkbook. I want to stop being the one who gives everything and still isn't enough." I picked up my folder. "I want to be done." Lila stood suddenly, face flushed. "You can't just walk away from family." I turned, looked her in the eyes for the last time. "You all walked away from me the day you changed the locks," I said quietly. "I'm just following your lead." The silence after the family meeting was the clearest sound I'd ever heard. No more calls, no more pleading messages, just the dull echo of what had finally ended. A week later, I packed the last of my things into 3 boxes and moved in with Ryan. His apartment in Portland wasn't big, but it was bright, warm. There were plants on the windowsill that he actually remembered to water, and coffee mugs that didn't match on purpose. He cleared a drawer for me without saying a word, like it was always meant to be mine. The first night I slept there, I didn't dream of doors being locked. I woke up to light. In the weeks that followed, I felt something slowly returning, something I hadn't realized I'd lost. Energy, direction, a kind of spaciousness inside my own body. I was no longer bracing for the next request, the next crisis disguised as conversation. I was just living. At work, I started showing up differently, not louder, just more present, more sure of myself. And people noticed. My team leaned in. My ideas stuck. A month after the meeting, my boss called me into his office. "We're creating a new role," he said. "Director of Strategic Marketing. It's yours if you want it." I accepted before I could talk myself out of it. Not out of ambition, but because I knew I was ready. Not because someone needed me to step up, but because I finally knew I could. With the raise came possibility. I sat down with my financial advisor again, and this time the numbers looked different. For the first time in years, I wasn't funneling my paycheck into someone else's survival. I was saving for my own future. A real one. A home that wouldn't require permission to enter. Back in Silverfield, things unraveled quietly. The house went on the market 2 months after the meeting. The listing price was lower than expected. The bank wanted a quick sale, according to Aunt Eleanor. My parents were blindsided. My mother cried for days. My father stopped speaking during meals. There was no miracle loan, no late-breaking rescue. They ended up moving into a small rental across town. 2 bedrooms, no yard. Lila's marriage collapsed soon after. Chase left in the middle of the night, according to Eleanor, packed his things while she was at work and didn't leave a note. The silence, this time, was his. Lila moved into a studio apartment and picked up a part-time job at a local insurance office. Her posts on social media became less frequent, filtered less, captioned more vaguely. She sent me 3 texts over the course of those months. Each one arrived after midnight. Each one was laced with bitterness. "Hope it was worth it. You got what you wanted, I guess. Congrats on burning it all down." I never replied, because she was wrong. I hadn't burned anything. They were the ones who struck the match the day they closed the door. and I had simply chosen not to stay inside. The need to be loved by them, that old hunger, had vanished. Not with violence, not with spite, but with time, and truth, and a kind of slow, internal untethering. I no longer looked at their silence as absence. I saw it for what it was: relief. Because the girl who once kept the family together with her bank account, her silence, and her spine, she didn't live here anymore. And the woman who had taken her place was finally building a life that didn't require disappearing to be safe. The email arrived on a rainy Thursday, tucked between a coupon newsletter and a shipping confirmation. The subject line was simple: from Mom. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Hazel, I don't expect a response to this. I just need to say a few things. Your father and I have spent the last few months packing up 30 years of memories. Every drawer, every box, reminded me of what we had, and what we ruined. We were wrong. Not just about the house, but about how we treated you. For years, you were always the strong one, the reliable one, and because of that, we leaned on you without ever asking if you were tired. We gave Lila the softness. You got the weight. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve that. But I want you to know that I see it now. I see you. I'm sorry for the years I didn't. I read the message twice, then a third time. It was the first thing my mother had sent me in a year that didn't try to rewrite the story. There were no excuses, no passive voice, just words, raw, unpolished, and quiet in their regret. I didn't reply that night, or the next, but a week later, I agreed to meet her for lunch. We picked a cafe halfway between Portland and Silverfield, neutral ground. I arrived early, sat by the window, and watched the rain bead softly on the glass. When she walked in, I hardly recognized her. She looked smaller, not older, just quieter in her body, as if something in her had finally softened, not out of comfort, but consequence. We made small talk first, about the weather, about the soup, about how Aunt Eleanor's hydrangeas had bloomed late this year. Then she folded her hands, and with a voice steadier than I expected, said, I want to apologize again. Not just for the house, for everything, for making you feel like second place in your own family, for taking your strength and calling it convenience. I didn't speak. I let the words settle. I've been seeing someone, she added. A therapist, Dr. Mendez. She's helped me understand a few things. About how my own childhood shaped how I parented. About how I confused need with love. That surprised me. Not because she needed help, but because she sought it. I looked at her then, not as the woman who once locked me out, but as someone just beginning to understand how much damage she'd inherited, and how much she'd passed on. I appreciate you saying that, I said carefully. But I need you to understand something too. I'm not coming back. Not to the role I used to play, not to being the fixer. If we build something new, it has to be different. It has to be mutual. She nodded, and for once, didn't argue. We talked for almost 2 hours, not about the past, not in detail, but about the present, about boundaries, about learning how to speak without needing to be right. When we stood to leave, she asked, do you think we could do this again sometime? I paused, considering. Maybe, I said. Let's take it slowly. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a door, slightly open. And this time, I held the key. The keys were warm in my hand, freshly cut, still smelling faintly of metal and wood dust. Ryan stood beside me on the small porch of our new home, just outside Portland, nestled on a quiet tree-lined street where wind chimes hummed and the neighbors smiled without asking too many questions. The house wasn't large. 3 bedrooms, a small garden out back, the paint on the fence chipped slightly at the corners. But to me, it felt like everything I had once thought I needed permission to deserve. We signed the papers on a Monday morning. No ceremony, no family gathering, just us, a notary, and a silent knowing that this time, I was stepping into a home I didn't have to buy with my silence. We moved in over the course of 2 weekends, books first, then furniture, then the small, quiet things that made the space ours. A rug we found at a second-hand store. A tea kettle I'd almost forgotten I'd bought years ago. tucked in the back of a cabinet from another life. I planted herbs on the windowsill. Ryan built a shelf for our records. Every part of it was slow, intentional, unforced. I continued therapy with Dr. Holloway, even with the worst behind me. Healing was not a finish line. It was a rhythm, a way of checking in, of staying steady. She reminded me, gently, that I didn't have to perform strength in order to own it. My parents reached out occasionally. Small things, holiday cards, photos of Aunt Eleanor's garden. A message from my mother on my birthday that simply read, "Thinking of you today. Hope you're well." I responded when I wanted to, kindly, briefly, always from a distance I had chosen. And that made all the difference. Lila never reached out again. No more midnight texts, no more accusations. Her absence filled a space in my life that used to be held open by hope. But I didn't mourn it. Some people don't need to exit with a slam. Sometimes, they just fade quietly from view. And sometimes, that's a kindness. On Sunday mornings, Ryan and I drink coffee on the back steps, wrapped in a blanket, the city just far enough to feel like background noise. There are no locks to change, no doors I'm barred from, no spaces I have to earn. I think about that house in Silverfield sometimes, about the girl who poured herself into its foundation, hoping that if she gave enough, she'd finally be let inside. But I don't miss that house, or who I had to be in order to keep it alive, because I live here now, in a home built not on guilt, not on sacrifice, but on choice, on honesty, on peace. For the first time in my life, I walk through a front door and know I belong here. Not because I paid enough, not because I proved myself worthy, but simply because I chose a life that didn't require me to vanish in order to be loved.